said, one of the things that I'm very interested in is reflection. I think that reflection is what it gets to a stage in our profession, it gets to a stage in our learning as learners that we need to stop and think, because we do need to remember that, there is more to life than following, sometimes we need to stop and reflect what's going on. So I'm going to share with you a cartoon script. I usually use different things in the classroom, and this particular cartoon strip, made a lot of noise in my head. It made me think quite a lot. So read and think with me. So this is from Calvin and Hobbes, and it says, Miss Wormwood, could we arrange our seats in a circle and have a little discussion? Specifically, I'd like to debate whether cannibalism ought to be grounds for leniency in murders since it's less wasteful. For some reason, they rather teach us stuff than any fool can look up in a book. Now, this particular case, let's have a look at the actual cartoon here. We see here a child trying to be engaged. Let's go beyond the topic, because I'm sure none of us wanted to discuss the topic, but particularly here, what we see is a student trying to go beyond what they do in the classroom. Okay, so here, and then we've got, for some reason, they rather teach us stuff than any fool can look up in a book. So what do we have here? A traditional classroom setting, the student being ridiculized by a question that is so out there. Now, this type of question is quite shocking, right? And what do we focus here? What do I see in this particular cartoon strip? The student wants to discuss citizenship. He wants to discuss the legal processes of the country. He wants to think about the laws, the legal responsibilities, the consequences of the actions. Is there more than one right answer? Now, all of these things, let's go beyond what he actually wants to discuss and look abroad. Look at all the different topics that the student wants to reflect on. Wouldn't this be fantastic? Imagine the discussion, imagine the creative thinking, the critical thinking, and imagine the language output. It would be so amazing to have a student like this. But what happened to this student? What is the reality? Our students are clearly naturally curious. We have students that want to identify a way to keep, he wants to continue a discussion and thinking about different ideas coming up from different, places and things. Now, students are naturally curious, and we know this. We need to find a way to keep curiosity learning without squashing it. And this is what happened in that previous cartoon. His curiosity was squashed. If those of you who follow different YouTube channels, there's a fantastic speaker. Well, there was a fantastic speaker, Sir Ken Robinson. He used to say that schools kill creativity. We need to find a way to nurture this curiosity, to not go only at the beginning of an activity, but also at the end, throughout. Sometimes we get so stuck in our lesson plan. And I strongly believe that we do need to plan. And, I will always say the same thing. I had a fantastic mentor, and if she's here today, I want to thank her for everything that she's done for me. She used to tell me, teach the students, not the plan. You plan certain things, but if something happens where you have, all of these amazing things that you can teach, that you can generate curiosity, create, increase all of this awareness, why shouldn't we take advantage of this? We need to nurture this curiosity and to allow it. So imagine what could have happened of the language that would have been mentioned there. Imagine all the extra reading, the viewing of videos. Imagine all of the extra work that could have happened in the background in order, and all the language of the process, all the, comprehension that the students would have made into making all of this, going beyond just, okay, you know what, let's stop speaking here and let's do some filling the blanks. Sometimes, we need to remember that we should not be putting ourselves, in the spot of stopping the curiosity. Because what happens a lot of the times, when do we raise awareness? When do we try to get the curiosity and the ideas? At the beginning of an activity. But sometimes, okay, let's move on. And, the students are there, and maybe, just maybe, we could have expanded a little bit more, plan the opportunity for that curiosity to develop. Now, if we think about reflection, in reflection, I was reading a few months ago, this is one of my son's favorite books. It's about a little spider that didn't know how to create a web. I promise this makes sense. Follow my thinking. Okay, so, and this little spider was playing and started to trying to learn how to be able to, create her own spider web. She talked to her mother, her grandparents, but nobody was able to teach her. So she started to play. And after playing and playing, she was able to create these fantastic spider webs. Now, I want you to, this is fiction, and I'm not going to criticize the book because I think the book is fantastic and my son loves it. Now, what are we teaching here in this particular case? This little spider learned how to create their spider web in a fantastic and creative way. Now, where was the reflection in this place? How many times do we allow students to play, to create, and then we move on to the next activity? Or maybe they show the class, but we don't stop and ask them to reflect. Because I'm a big believer in learning by doing. I'm a strong believer in learning through play. That's how I've learned a lot of things, especially manual work. I've played around, I've tried figuring things out, but there needs a moment for real learning to take place. We need to stop and reflect. Because I can guarantee it that this little spider, without reflecting, would not have been able to do all of these lovely swirls that we see in that spider web. Maybe they would have done the lines, the typical straight lines, but would they have had the chance to go a little bit more beyond? Because when we allow to reflect on how things are done, that is when students learn and they can become more creative. It's when we plan to reflect is the moment when we can see our students improving. I've been teaching, I teach a lot of classes. At the moment, I teach advanced levels. And what happens with advanced levels is that they have good language and they think that's enough. They don't know how to increase. They don't know how to go beyond. And if they don't stop and reflect, if they don't continue to investigate, if they don't go through that curiosity, they will not be able to go beyond that standard level. So this is what is important, and we need to enable that time of reflection. Now, I'm going to throw some quotes in the middle of my talk, and I'd like you to tell me, reflection should be done at the end of class, never at the beginning. What do you think? I'll give you a few seconds to type. Some disagree. Disagree, agree, some disagree. It depends. False, false, false. I'm not going to give you the answer yet. I'm going to let you think about that. Why is reflection important? Because it builds more resilient students. When students have this ability to reflect, it's one that they can go beyond. Because what happens? Sometimes our students hit the wall and they can't move on. But when they are able to reflect and say, okay, why didn't it work? It didn't work because of this, because of that. You know, once they start to realize why things aren't working, they can find solutions and they won't depend so much on us. And I think this is the key part of reflection, that it allows us a little bit less, our students to be less dependent on us as teachers. You know, I love teaching and I love the relationship that I have with my students, but I don't want them to depend on me. I want them to learn beyond what I teach them. I want them to not depend on their teacher for, is this correct? Is this, no, there's more than just correct. Is try to expand on this, try to play around, take risks. So this reflection allows this resilience. And this resilience is the ability to recover quickly from difficulty or toughness. We get these students with some grit, with passion and perseverance for long-term goals. Because when you can reflect on what you are doing, it means that you can think about in forward. You can think about how you can change, or even if you succeeded in something, what about doing it this way? What about doing it the other way? You know, it's that reflection, that ongoing reflection that makes us the long-term learners that we want. You know, we need to be able to allow students to stop and think, because especially now, what is our reality? Now, I don't know if, again, reflection. At the moment, I'm taking my time to stop and reflect on what's going on in my classroom. I'm on holidays at the moment in the Southern Hemisphere, we're on holidays, and I've stopped to reflect on what is happening in my classroom. This year, in my country, we were lucky enough that we did not have to stop classes. We were able to continue everything face to face. And yet my students have had some serious issues. I teach year 11 and 12, you know, this the last 2 years of high school. I have a lot of things that have been already solved by the previous teachers. So there are less things that I need to do I used to have less things to do. You know, there are things that they would naturally come already ready. But what happens? The pandemic took its toll on us. It's us as teachers, but on our students as well. What did we end up doing? And I'm not going to criticize, because as an experienced online moderator, I did the same thing. I spoon-fed a lot of my students. Why? Because I wanted them to go through the content. Sometimes we didn't focus so much on the process of learning. When I realized I was spoon-feeding, I said, ooh, we need to stop. And then we went for. Okay, so this is what we want. We want these things about less spoon feeding, but we need to come back to that, back to creating, you know, that creative outburst. We need to be able to give them that critical thinking that they once had. There was less time to reflect on what really mattered during the pandemic. Especially the first year, I think we just did what we could. You know, we just, okay, let's do what we can with all the context that we have. And then maybe the second time around, we were so mentally exhausted by what happened that some of us didn't try something new. Others tried. Maybe they succeeded, they failed. But there was less time to reflect during the pandemic. And that means that our students have stopped reflecting. Naturally, they will not do it alone. They need us, because we were focused on the content and to make sure that they didn't fall behind, and the syllabus, you know, we all did the same thing. Do not worry. Okay. We focused on different aspects, and maybe we can focus, now that we're back, let's focus again on the experience of learning, on the importance, you know, of having these things through, because this is what we have. We need to include reflection in the classroom. We need to go beyond what's happening. You know, it's more than just, yes, I agree and disagree. Any questions? Or just one question? We need to make it more of a conscious effort, you know? I'm just seeing that there's a question. I like Fatma's question about what might hinder attempts of reflection. What can block a teacher to initiate reflection? I think that question, Fatma, what you're asking there is, thanks Melissa for pointing it out, is here a question, something that's going to happen is that we sometimes pay too much attention on the syllabus and on the admin side of things. And yes, we have the admin, we have admin tasks to do, we have the syllabus, we have a lot of things, but we can't always be guided by that. We need to be guided by our students. Sometimes the students need to stop, and we need to stop and think why things are working or why things aren't working, So trying to help them to go beyond that little part of teaching, okay, great, you've used the correct verbs, you've used the correct vocabulary, now let's move on. Let's explore a little bit more, The way that we can learn collocations is through reflection. Okay, let's look at the words that collocate. Okay, what are the words that are collocate with these particular items of vocabulary we are working with? Okay, so out of these collocations, can I use this word with another collocation? Because we know that words, sometimes there are similar meanings in words. So let's go beyond that. How can we involve this? This is what I mean by reflection, is that not just about my process as a learner or my process, but even the little one exercise. If we start to spark reflection, we can spark curiosity, and that curiosity will take students further. And that is what we want. We want students to become less guided by us, less steered by us, in the sense that we take them through what we want them to. Imagine if they would explore the collocations of a specific words, and then they would learn 2 or 3 new expressions. And this will help them become more independent. There are different tools that we can use in order to make them more independent. We need to take advantage of those tools, So I hope that Fatma answered that question. Okay, so I think what sometimes blocks our reflection, to initiate reflection, as you're saying, is time. We look at our watches. Oh, I've got 5 minutes left. Oh, I can't continue. Or, sometimes we don't genuinely plan for reflection. And when we plan for reflection, that is when change really happens. This comes from Harvard. I don't know if you've heard of Harvard Project Zero. They have fantastic things that are out there. There's 8 forces that shape group culture. And there's one particular about routines that, kind of sparked my attention. And it says here that routines, whether they're for management, participation, discourse, instruction, learning, or thinking, help to minimize confusion, reduce uncertainty, and direct activity along known paths. Of particular importance in learning groups is the presence of thinking and learning routines that help to direct, guide, scaffold learning and thinking. Reflection. We need to include this in our classroom routines. This is why I think that if reflection doesn't come natural, maybe plan for it. Think about, ask questions. Why does this work and why doesn't this work? Remember those concept checking questions. Have those 3 or 4 questions that you can ask students. Why did this work? Why didn't this work? Why did you put this verb here and why is this wrong? Because it's irregular verb, so it's not just ed. Okay, it could be something as simple as that, but it's that moment of stopping and thinking will help them go beyond, beyond that. And I mean, I think one of the things that I always tend to remember is when we talk about, for example, I think I love conditionals as a grammar point because of the reflection that it allows you to do naturally. So reflection isn't just about the topic that we're teaching. It's not about just the reading or the listening text. It's about all the process of every little detail that you're doing, So it helps. We need to go beyond the obvious And what do I mean by beyond the obvious? You know, there are many things that we tend to do. So there has to be more reflection too. Did you like it? Yes or no? What is the point of reflecting? You know, it's the most effective teaching method. And this is what I loved. You know, guide students towards independent learning, because this is what we want reflection to do. We want students to go beyond us, you know, and when they come back to you and they say, oh, I remember you taught me this, you know, think about yourselves as learners. We've all experienced those teachers that didn't just put a stop to us, that made us think more. You know, it guides the situation in the application knowledge of context. Because once we learn how to use conditional, like the second conditional, we're able to use it for hypothetical situations, to give advice. You know, it's just those little details, you know, and it stretches the students beyond their preferred style. You know, it gives them that opportunity to go a little bit further, because sometimes, let's face it, our students don't like to read, but a lot of the information that they're looking for is probably found in books, in online texts. So maybe they will be forced to read and go beyond that comprehension. Because I think this is what we need to think about. We need to think about all of these things and to encourage reflection and self-regulation. It would help our students to think, okay, this writing text, I do a lot of reflection, especially when it comes to writing. My students in particular do a lot of writing. They sit for international exams, and a lot of their international exams everything is written. So my strongest focus in the classroom is always about reflection. I always reflect. Okay, the first thing they're going to do, which is natural, they're going to look at everything that was wrong. So in other words, everything that I underlined. Sometimes they ask, but Majo, I saw this on an article. Why is this wrong? It's not wrong, because I underline correct and incorrect things. I don't only just give them what's wrong, you know, and I encourage that reflection. And the first thing that they have to do is this right or wrong? Are you convinced or not convinced? These are the things that I tend to play around with, you know. All of these ideas come from this book by Laura Lard, Teaching as a Design Science, highly recommended. And so many things that we need to think about. Another statement that I like to leave there: young kids cannot reflect. Agree or disagree? We're coming, Jatika, we're coming into the practical side. So definitely have a few activities for you. Okay, so here, I like the fact that most are disagreeing. Young kids can reflect. Now, let's think about the level of reflection. You know, I'm not going to ask my 3-year-old son to reflect on why or why not certain things. But I will ask him to reflect is, if you put your your hands in the door, your fingers in the door, look what happens. You will hurt yourself. So what do you have to do? Not put my hand there. You know, those little details, I ask my son to reflect. You know, they can reflect. They can reflect at their own level. I'm not going to ask my 15-year-old students to reflect as an adult. I will not ask my 15-year-olds to reflect like a 10-year-old either. You know, reflection is a possibility. And those of you who teach younger children, is important to include reflection in the classroom, and because they can reflect, you know. As Jamoki is saying, the level of reflection won't be as deep as older students, but they can still reflect. They might not understand every single little thing, but they will understand most basic aspects. So how can we make these some practical tips, as some were asking? I know we all hate summative assessment, and you can all say whatever, but summative assessment is a part of teaching. We need to include it. That's our reality. So can we make this summative assessment to our advantage? Can we give them like a type of, I agree, James, formative assessment is better, especially for reflection. But for example, here in Uruguay, those of you who, we need to submit grades. There's no alternative. By the end of specific moments, I need to have a grade. So I use summative assessment, as most of us do, but the way that we use summative assessment is I add reflection. Okay, so for example, once they do the test, I create a checklist. So they have a checklist, and here what they need to do is that they need to find what they did right, what did they wrong, what did they forget to include, what didn't they include, depending on the test. If it's a reading multiple choice, I will ask them, okay, check all your right answers, check all the wrong answers. Why do you think that's the wrong answer? You know, ask these type of questions, because it's a way of using a summative test that we needed to have because we needed a grade, but we're also adding a learning process behind it, you know? So ungraded, sometimes I give the summative assessment ungraded. So I don't give them the grade yet. I do give them the grade because that's the whole purpose of summative assessment, but I don't tell them the grades yet. And I ask them, what do you think is your grade? One of the greatest advantages that we have as English teachers that not all subjects have, and I know this might come as a surprise to you, but not all subjects have correction bands. You know, regardless of where you teach, we have access to the Common European Framework bands. So for example, in a writing text, you know what is expected of an A1, a B2, a C1. And all of these things are, so we can give them those comments, and they can figure out what their grade is, you know? So get them to comment, like match those comments to the criteria. Ask questions. I allow a lot of the times to retake or fix. So for example, I give them their test and say, okay, look at all your wrong answers and try to see if you can figure it out now. Now, I've already submitted that grade into my report cards because that's what we need to do. But when I allow them to retake it, sometimes their anxiety is lower. They're, are able to fix it, and they can see their standards. They can see where they are, So all of these things are fantastic because it allows us to have that ability for them to reflect, okay, that's not the right answer. This is the right answer. And then I would ask, why did you change the answer? What made this answer more correct than the one that you put? I misinterpreted, didn't understand, I thought. And that moment of reflection is happening because we can't forget that what we want our students to do is to reflect. Highlight uses of language. This is what I love to do. And my students always complain because I don't only highlight the negative, I highlight the positive. So I remember, I still remember a while back ago that I had this long list of, I used to have a long list of things to do and not to do when we were doing the teaching course. And one of the things was that never correct in red pen. And then, of course, and I always think that if I correct in red, if I correct in blue, in green, and everything is highlighted, a student's going to have a panic attack because they think, oh, everything is wrong. Today, most of my corrections are online. So I don't, and because of the tools that we use at school, we don't necessarily have the choice of the color. So they get the corrections. And what I've noticed about those corrections is that I make comments, I make here, there, and then I look. And then they look at the text. Because they see so much is highlighted, my students are already used to this. They know that I will highlight everything that calls my attention, whether it's right or wrong. Because if they're right things, I want them to feel oh, this is fantastic, because correction is not just what's wrong, it's what's right as well. And we sometimes forget that, especially in writing. In writing, speaking, maybe say, oh, fantastic, great job. You said this phrase. They might remember, but they might not. But in writing, when they see it, and they can always go back to it, imagine having, oh, great, fantastic. Where did you pick up this expression? Because this is what happens in the classroom. When students bring what they've learned from other places, they feel more encouraged, their creativity goes up, their reflection goes up, because next time they may be watching a series on Netflix, paying attention, oh, that expression. I usually ask them, okay, where did you come up with this expression? If I see it's a fixed expression but doesn't quite fit, I say, okay, this is fantastic. Where did you pick this up from? I heard it from this place. And okay, so what you hear from this, you've heard this comment, fantastic. Now, what was the context? What was happening in the background? Do you remember? And so next time they pick up a quote, they're looking at the background. They're looking at what's happening before and after. And there is reflection. That little aspect of reflection, they will next time, before they include a phrase or something they've heard, they will think about, does this fit the context? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But at least they're going through the process, because when we want students to continue to grow, we need them to reflect. They will not grow without their reflection. And that is a big difference between those higher achievers than the lower achievers. Guided discovery is probably one of my favorite methods. And I've seen it a lot I'm also a physical educational teacher. I see it a lot in physical education. And I think we need to do it more in the classroom, but real guided discovery. So the teacher creates a scenario and gives different examples of instructions to guide the students into discovering the rules. So for example, what I do a lot of guided discovery with pronunciation. So remember the pronunciation of regular past tenses. So we've got, for example, intended, tried, all of these words. Okay, and then I put all the words on the board. I put all the regular verbs I write them already in the past: intended, planned, depended, and then I ask them to classify. Okay, let's classify their pronunciation, but I don't pronounce it for them. I say, this word, is it pronounced planned or planned? So what the students do is they start to put the words according to if it's an id ending or if it's a d or t ending. I do that. And then I ask them, so they go through, which I check, okay, right, wrong, okay, now let's do it. I will give you the right answer. I give them the right answer. And then I ask them, discover the rule. What's the rule? And then they start to explore that rule. What do all of these words have in common? They end in t or d. Do they end in t or d, or is it the sound? That's when I start to play a little bit around, and that's when they realize that the rule, when the t, d ends, and the verb, when the regular verb ends in t or d, we add like the extra syllable, the id. So here, what happens is that they discover the rules, they go through the steps, there's a lot of analysis going on. There's a simple task of classification, and from there they need to discover rules. I love when they discover those rules. Try to choose rules that actually work. Don't use the rules that yes, but, English. You teach a grammar rule, yes, except in the situation of, try to be careful with that. So with spelling rules, it might work as well. Try to explore this guided discovery, because it's amazing how it works. It's amazing how students come together and start to, accept and explore. Now, we need to give the steps to the students so that they are guided to discover. And this is the key part. We need to plan the activity with key steps so that we know that our students go from one to the next, to the next, to the next. Does this take more time? Yes. Do I fall behind in my syllable? Yes. Do I care? No. Because we need to include reflection. It takes 10 minutes, but how important are those 10 minutes? We need to go beyond, this. We need to stop thinking and fighting with the syllabus. I've accepted that I will always be behind. My heads at school know that I'll be behind. I'll figure it out. My students will figure it out. No problems. I can't fall behind 3 months. I can't have a 3 months behind syllabus. But if I fall behind 2 days, 3 days, a week, but I'm doing more discovery, I'm doing more guiding, and I'm doing more reflection, this means that I can send some things for homework and they will be able to do it more confidently. Certain things might be done faster because they're already getting used to reflection. We need to make, especially now because of the pandemic, we have stopped reflecting. We need to reflect seriously. We need to make it a conscious effort, Set up goals. I like to reflect a lot before, at the beginning of a lesson. So for example, I come back during the year. And we come back during the year. So I ask students, okay, this year we're going to be doing this in particular. What are your expectations? My expectations are that I'm going to pass. Okay, let's go beyond the passing. All right. I try to get away from the grades and I say, okay, you want to do well? Okay, this is what you need to do well. Look at the writing, look at the speaking, look at the reading, look at the listening. These are what is expected of you. How are you going to do this? To get here, to get to the part where it says uses less common lexes, you need to use less common lexes. What does that mean? That I am not the only one that's going to teach you language. You are going to have to explore yourself. You are going to have to reflect if it works or doesn't work. All of these things need to do. We need to be able to go beyond, and then come back during the year and ask them, what are you doing to get to those goals? Because I have my own goals, of course. I always have the same goals. I want all my students to do well. And then I have more specific examples. Say, I want this student to explore this area. I want this one to do something else. I have all these things, So try to spark natural conversation and natural reflection. Why do you think you did well in this test? Why do you think you didn't do well in the test? This is why I think summative assessment can be used a lot for us, because we know we have to do it anyway. So let's take advantage of those tests that we have to set and let's make them beneficial for our context. The KWL charts are always a favorite, know what I know, what I would like to know, what I have learned. I think this is very common, especially in primary school, that we have that KWL charts. I'm bringing them to year 11 and 12. My students said, but Majo, we did this in primary school. Yes, but you clearly didn't understand them because I want you to reflect on what you knew, what you wanted to know, and then what you learned. These three things the students are able to reflect because it makes them stop consciously and think, okay, what do I know about this? About habits and routines. What do I know about habits and routines? I know that habits and routine, I know some expressions. I know that habits and routines are things that happen as a routine. So it means that it happens on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. There's a regularity to that. What would you like to know? I would like to know how to explore, how to talk about my daily routines. What did you learn? Well, we use present simple for daily routines. I learned some new collocations. I learned that get up and wake up are two different things, so those little things can be extremely useful. So can you see how reflection can be done very easily and very quickly, and a lot of moments in our lesson. It's not just at the beginning of the lesson, like the first quote I asked you to think about. It can be done throughout the lesson. It needs to be throughout the lesson. So reflection can be done after learning, but not in the last 5 minutes. Don't leave the reflection for the last 5 minutes. It doesn't work. Because in the last 5 minutes of the lesson, let's face it, I'm looking at my watch to see when is the bell going to go. My students are looking at their watch, well, probably looking at their phone saying, okay, Majo, we have 5 minutes left. And once you hear we have 5 minutes left, it's out the window. It doesn't exist anymore. So after the learning has taken place, but not in the last 5 minutes, so maybe do it the next lesson. Why not? You know, for example, I've asked 1 minute paper. So I ask students to write for 1 minute. They write everything. Okay. They write everything. Then here's where we start to incorporate different patterns of interaction. Think, pair, share. So get them to 1 minute to think about everything that they've learned, to compare in pairs, and then share it in the classroom or share it in a group. Reflection snowball. I don't do this in the classroom because I have teenagers, and again, I have teenagers, but you can write reflections, put them up in a ball, and then throw it across the classroom. That's always interesting in that sense. Exit tickets have been very popular recently. I think they've come back. So you can ask them what they've learned with KWL charts, as we've discussed. Misconception check, and this is what I've done. I gave you a quote, young children cannot reflect. I made you think. I probably made some of you angry. It wasn't done on purpose because that was a misconception check. Let's check if you agree or disagree. I don't like the idea of thinking that young children cannot reflect. They can reflect. Hypothetical checks as well. What if? Checklist, I think, is always a huge benefit. Definitely stop and switch. So you stop and switch with the person next to you to see how you're reflecting, comparing. And I know here is a bit difficult, and we don't like to compare students, but sometimes students need to compare good examples. So what I've done, I always ask permission. I don't compare bad examples. I always read the good examples out because I don't want to expose anybody. So I asked the student because I always get students that ask, Majo, you're a very harsh marker. How am I supposed to get to 7? You want to know? A 7 is the highest. So you want to know how to get a 7? Okay, here. And I read a 7. And they say, once they realize that moment is when they say, okay, so what? And then we go, what did this particular student do to get a 7? They use less common lexes. They use a complex vocabulary, complex grammar. They research the topic, so it's not just giving me their opinion. They've cited sources. It's been a lot of fun. So all of these things it's growing, and it's always beneficial. With comparison, I know it's very delicate, but if you have a strong student and that is happy to share, my strong student went bright red. She was extremely embarrassed. She said yes, she had accepted, but still, she was very embarrassed of having her information read. But it was a really good essay, for example. I wanted others to see what a good essay was. So exactly, we compare examples and what works, as Zoya is mentioning. Don't focus on the actual. I'm not saying this student is perfect. I'm saying this writing is very well done. Look at what she did. So we're not comparing work. What they did is sometimes good. I ask them to compare. So I sometimes put in pairs. What can you learn from this? What can you learn from each other? That's something that I love to do. And, it's really beneficial in that sense. And then here's a question I'm going to leave for you. Are you reflecting? Do you have time to reflect? sometimes we forget that we are also humans. We need to stop and reflect. So some tips would be to set up goals and check as you go along. Look at misconception checks. Think about your beliefs as teachers. For example, I'm a strong believer of education for all. I think everybody has the capacity to learn, maybe not at the same rate, but everybody has access to learn. And then I think, what am I doing in the classroom for that? Am I paying attention to that? I am a strong believer in reflection. I think reflection is the key to improving education. Am I doing enough reflection in the classroom? No, reflection in itself can help us avoid burnout. And this is something very personal for me. I've felt burnout before. And I think this is a natural thing, especially after the pandemic. But when I started to reflect, it helped me avoid burnout, and it gave me a new passion for teaching. And I think this is the most powerful thing, because we don't want to leave. We don't want great teachers to leave the classroom. We want them to continue. So how can we avoid that burnout? By reflecting, by finding something different to reflect on, and it will always help us in that sense. So here are some of the sources I used. I will make them available to all of you. I want to thank you for your attention, for your fantastic comments. I'm more than happy now to answer all your questions.
Thanks, Michael. That was great for me personally, because the last time you did this talk was at World Teachers Day, and it was sort of 17 hours in, I think, and so my brain was slightly somewhere else by that point. So at least this time I've been able to watch it properly and enjoy it, rather than
awesome.
Oh, I need to stop soon. So that was brilliant, and so thank you for that. Really, really enjoyable and fantastically useful, I think, as well. Certainly from the comments, huge number of comments. So thank you everyone who's been watching and commenting and kind of giving your insight and input as well, and particular mention, I think, to a guy called James Chamberlain, who's been putting in links to people for things like exit tickets, I think, and KWL
awesome.
charts.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And also obviously special mention to people watching on Facebook as well. Thank you for joining there. Hope you've got a lot out of it. Questions, there are lots of questions, lots and lots of them. I've got a few, but I don't want to be selfish. I'll just ask the ones from people in the audience. Really, really quick one. First one, I think at the beginning you mentioned a book. Did you mention a book? Or was it maybe Ken Robinson's talk? I'm not sure.
It could be Ken Robinson's book, or Lauren, I'll put in the chat now.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions.
Laura teaching as a design science.
Okay. Someone's asked, is it Diary of a Madman? Did you mention that? Was that you?
No.
No, didn't think so. Okay. Right, okay. Yeah, there's L'Oreal, and I think the person who's asking the question, possibly you mean, yeah, the video of Ken Robinson. So Ken Robinson, if you Google Ken Robinson, and what was it, why education systems are failing? I can't remember exactly what I know the talk, but I can't.
I think it was like creativity. Education's killing creativity, or
there you go.
There's so many of his talks. There's a TED talk in particular that I was thinking about. I can't think of it now, but there's if you put TED talk Ken Robinson, it will appear.
Yeah, it'll be there. Brilliant. Okay, this is a favorite question, and I think everyone has thoughts. How can we implement effective reflection practices with busy schedules? And I think that's something that you kind of covered largely, and for me anyway, was kind of the underlying theme throughout the whole talk, actually.
Exactly.
And it kind of made me, I think, yeah, for me, it made me sort of think about your focus as a teacher. Are you focusing on the students, or are you focusing on just getting through the syllabus, the day, the lesson plan? Whereas obviously I think what you were saying very much and correctly is, you know, the focus is on, you know, students doing well.
Exactly. So sacrifice an activity, send it for homework, but don't sacrifice reflection. I think that's the key part.
Thank you. There you go. I mean, it's interesting because this whole kind of, you know, I've got a busy schedule, or I've got a huge class, or, you know, and this generally kind of comes up. And I think, you know, as you rightly said, that the focus is on you want your students to do well. So what's going to help them to do that? And obviously reflection is a core kind of element there, rather than just, okay, tick, we've done present perfect, tick, we've done this, tick, you know, and for well-being as well, which is interesting. Okay, question. So hopefully Ulita and whoever else liked that question, hopefully that answers that. Fabio, is it a good technique to have students summarize the class at the end? This kind of goes back to what you're saying, or is it better for them to do it in a blog or discussion panel? Have you used kind of that idea?
Interesting. I'm guessing, Fabio, you have online classes. If you have online classes, I mean, you can give a quick summary and then continue in the forums. I think if you have discussion panels, the reflection can go even further. And for those students who maybe just need a few minutes to think, maybe it's even better in that sense. But again, it all depends on your context. I mean, we do that a lot when we teach online. I've got Melissa here, who's also a moderator. We do a lot of online courses, and a lot of the times in the discussion panels, we want them to reflect, to question. And because the discussion panel is not live, people have time to think. And I think that's a great benefit.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just looking through the comments and things like that. Melissa, thank you ever so much for your support. I know you have to go, so please do feel free to get off to the next event, I think, that you're helping out with or managing. So thank you, Melissa. Okay, Musab, what percentage of my lessons should I reflect in? I mean, I guess, do you plan? I mean, you plan reflection in? Is there a percentage that you kind of think about? Okay, well, or is it just kind of no?
I've never thought of percentage. Now I'm reflecting on that, but I'm not very mathematical in that sense. But I do try, if I have maybe like 2 or 3 activities, again, because the levels I teach are quite high, so it's not so many different activities. I have like maybe 2 or 3 activities that last half an hour. So if I've got 2 or 3, I try one of those. So maybe a third of the time, I try to create something that helps them reflect. So even if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but don't always do it at the end. Do it halfway through, maybe in the change between one activity and the other. It's a good way of doing some speaking activity, because that's a good thing about language teachers. As long as we're using the language, we can get away with anything. So reflection, if you are being observed and the observer says, no, but I'm doing a speaking activity and making the most of the reflection process at the same time. So I would try to do it, even if it's a break type of thing, instead of doing like activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. Okay, let's have a break, reflect. What are you getting right? What are you getting wrong? And why?
Okay.
So, yeah.
I guess when you're sort of planning a lesson, certainly whenever I've planned a lesson, I've tried to sort of create a space for things like reflection or the kind of the fact that they might go on a bit longer if there's interest, or there might be, so I guess it's sort of a skill in terms of lesson planning, to not
Definitely.
try and, this is what we'll do for the first 5 minutes, then the next 10, then it's kind of creating that space.
I always share that I loved my grammar tutor. I struggled a lot with grammar when I was becoming a teacher, and my grammar tutor, he said he had actually planned 5-minute majo. He had 5-minute majo written down because he knew that I would ask him to justify everything he said. Like, why do I need to know this? How does this help me teach it? Like, I wasn't challenging his authority. It was what I wanted to know why. So why was it important for me to know such detail of the present perfect, for example? So, oh yes, I drove him crazy.
5 minutes, Macho. Great. Excellent. I guess with some reflection activities, there's a question here from Vasilisa about students feeling shy. I mean, some of the techniques that you put there were a sort of individual reflection. So I guess with shy students, what would you suggest that they know? Teachers, obviously, if they know their students, then they know what's going to work best with them. No.
Maybe think, pair, share. I think that's probably the best thing for shy students, because when they think on themselves, they think, and then they share it with just one person, they don't feel as exposed. And what happens a lot of the times that the other person shares something similar, or they share a similar difficulty or another difficulty. And that makes the shy students a little bit less nervous. I think that's the key part.
Okay. Okay. One last question, then I'm going to have to stop, I'm afraid. Let's have a look. How can we, and this kind of goes back to the 5 minutes for Michael, how can we avoid students asking too many questions in the middle of the lesson, even if we apply effective reflection practices?
Why is that bad to ask questions?
Okay, there you go.
I mean, something that I used to use back channel, but then technology was a problem in my classroom. So I would get them to write the questions. I would ask post-its, get students to write questions. I sometimes try to say, okay, especially when I'm delivering instructions, which drives me crazy because they always ask, what's the next step? What's next? No, wait. So I try to give instructions. Sometimes I write them on the board. I give them, for the next 10 minutes, you can't ask any questions. Because a lot of the times it's their anxiety. That's, I mean, as an anxious person, I know. So it's like looking in a mirror when I see my students so jumping, they want to ask hundreds of questions. If the questions are valid, they will still be there. Ask them to write them down, just to have that quiet time to think. And then if the questions are still valid, then they will pick it up.
Michael, thank you ever so much for this.
Thank you for the opportunity.